At 0200 hours local time, the flat steppe north of Crimea lit up. A Russian logistics hub, half of it buried underground, erupted in fire near the village of Stavky, just outside occupied Armiansk. Within the hour, a thermal sensor on a NASA satellite hundreds of miles overhead registered the heat bloom. The fire would still be burning when the sun came up. This was the neck of Crimea, the Isthmus of Perekop, a strip of land only 5 to 7 miles wide, the single land gateway between the peninsula and the mainland. Russia had chosen this exact spot to bury a command center and weapons stores beneath concrete and earth, certain that nothing Ukraine flew could reach what was hidden below. They were wrong. And the reason they were wrong is what makes this strike unlike any before it. The aircraft that came for them that night were not sleek cruise missiles. They were not one-way suicide drones. They were converted civilian sport planes, ultralight aircraft you could buy for the price of a used car, each carrying a single 220-pound bomb slung beneath its belly, at least 10 of them. And unlike the FPVs Ukraine had thrown at this war for years, these would drop their bombs, bank away, and fly home to do it all again. To understand why Ukraine sent an entire squadron after this one site, you have to understand what Russia had built here. Satellite images from Maxar, taken weeks before the strike, showed the truth beneath the surface. On the grounds of a former fish hatchery near Stavky, Russian troops had carved out a fortified complex, a web of trenches, covered firing positions, and reinforced command posts. They had dug a ramp leading underground wide enough to drive vehicles straight into the earth, and around it, warehouses stacked with weapons and supplies. This was not a forward outpost. This was a nerve center for sustaining Russian forces at the very edge of Crimea. Its location was the whole point. Armiansk sits on the Isthmus of Perekop, the narrow land bridge that is one of only 3 overland corridors connecting the peninsula to the mainland. Everything Russia moves into Crimea by road, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, men, has to funnel through one of these choke points. A hub here doesn't supply a single unit, it feeds an entire front. That is why Russia went underground. For 2 years, Ukrainian drones had turned exposed depots and parked vehicles into fireballs. So Russia adapted the only way it could. It buried the target. Command posts under earth, vehicle bays beneath a concrete ramp, stores dug in where no top attack drone could reach them. They buried a logistics hub in the ground because they believed that underground at last was untouchable. The next hour would prove that even the earth was no longer deep enough. Now look at what Ukraine sent against all that concrete and steel. Not a ballistic missile costing millions, not a stealth aircraft. The machines that flew towards Stavky that night began their lives as SkyRanger and Nynja ultralights, recreational sport planes, the kind flown by weekend hobbyists, built from tube and fabric and a small engine. Strip out the cockpit, bolt in a remote control system and an electro-optical camera, and hang a bomb underneath. Ukraine calls them Horynych. The airframe underneath costs about as much as a used car. Against them stood one of the densest air defense concentrations on the planet. Crimea has been layered for years with long-range S-400 batteries, medium-range Buk systems, close-in Pantsir guns, and electronic warfare stations meant to blind anything that flies. On paper, a slow propeller plane wandering toward the peninsula should have been the easiest target imaginable, shot out of the sky at the outer edge long before it ever saw its objective. But the battlefield does not run on advertised numbers. It runs on which systems are still standing on any given night. And this is the logic that has come to define Ukraine's war against Crimea. You do not need to defeat the whole air defense network. You do not need to destroy every launcher. You only need to wear it down. One radar here, one Panzer there, one bridge, one battery, until a gap opens wide enough for a hobbyist's airplane to fly through and drop a real bomb on a buried command post. The genius was never in the aircraft, it was in the arithmetic. A used car airframe and a 220-pound bomb aimed at a target Russia had spent months and millions burying underground, and reusable so the same plane could come back tomorrow. Russia built downward to survive the drones. Ukraine simply changed what was flying. To reach Stavky, an aircraft has to pass through the layers Russia built to make Crimea a fortress. On paper, they nest one inside another. Farthest out sits the S-400. The long-range ring, radars reaching hundreds of miles, meant to kill targets high and far. Behind it, the Buk M3 fills the medium band, fast missiles for anything that slips the outer layer. Closer in, the Panzer S-1 is the goalkeeper. Short-range missiles paired with twin 30mm cannons firing thousands of rounds a minute, built for exactly one job: swatting down low, slow threats like drones. And woven through all of it, electronic warfare stations like Pole 21, jamming satellite navigation across tens of miles. That is the fortress on paper. The reality by mid-July was thinner. All through 2026, Ukraine had been peeling this network apart. In February, its special operators destroyed an S-400 launcher and its radar near Sofiivka, along with the Panzer guarding them. In late June, more S-400 components and 2 more Panzers were hit near Kerch. Ukraine's security service claimed it had wiped out roughly half of Russia's entire Panzer fleet. Every system removed was one less pair of eyes over the isthmus. So the corridor toward Armiansk was no longer a wall. It was a wall with holes in it, and Ukraine knew where they were. Into those gaps flew the Horynych, slow, low, quiet. A small engine and a propeller instead of a screaming turbine. Its operators watched through an electro-optical camera, flying it by sight toward a target they had studied from orbit. Beneath each one hung a single OFAB 100-120, a high-explosive fragmentation aerial bomb weighing around 220 pounds. Not a shaped charge for piercing armor, but a heavy blast weapon meant to collapse structures and tear open whatever it landed on. And when the bomb was gone, the airframe turned for home. 10 aircraft, 10 real bombs aimed at a hole in a fortress that was supposed to have none. The strike that hit Stavky did not begin at Stavky. It began weeks earlier. In every place, the fortress had already been torn open. By the second week of July, the approaches to Crimea were a graveyard of broken defenses. The bridges the network relied on for resupply had been cut one after another. Chongar hit at least 3 separate times in June. The Perekop-Armiansk road bridge struck. A bridge near Stavky itself dropped. Around 50 Russian vehicles had been caught and destroyed at Armiansk in a single strike weeks before. Substations feeding the local radars had gone dark. Each of those blows was a loss for Russia, but each was a loss already calculated, because together they did something no single strike could. They opened a window over the isthmus on one night wide enough to fly through. And here is the trap Russia had built for itself. It had gone underground precisely to survive the drones, to put its command posts and vehicle bays where a small quadcopter or a diving FP-5 could never reach. That decision made sense against the war it expected. It made no sense at all against a squadron of aircraft carrying full-sized aerial bombs. Russia had spent months digging down to defeat a threat that came from close range. It never planned for a bomb that would come down from above and follow it into the ground. At 0140 hours local time, the first Horynych crossed into the approach corridor. Imagine you are the air defense officer on duty that night. Your screens are thinner than they should be. A radar here is down. A Panzer there was destroyed last week. The substation feeding your sector went dark days ago. Something slow is crawling toward the isthmus, low over the flat steppe. Too small and too sluggish to read as a missile. Is it a decoy? A stray reconnaissance drone? By the time you decide it matters, it is already lining up on the buried ramp you were sent here to protect. What do you fire, and with what, when half of what you had is already gone? This was the paradox of the Horynych. Its greatest weakness, slow, low, propeller-driven, barely faster than highway traffic, was also its cover. Over open ground, only about 20 meters above sea level, with the network already gutted, a little sport plane didn't scream in like a cruise missile. It drifted, and drifting was enough. The operators flew by the electro-optical camera in the nose, watching the fortified complex swell in the frame, hunting for the one feature that mattered most, the mouth of the underground ramp. Then came the moment the whole plan turned on. The first bombs fell on what could be seen: the surface structures, the exposed positions, the warehouses above ground. Fire bloomed across the complex, but the operators watching the feed understood something the explosions alone couldn't tell them. The real prize wasn't burning. The command posts, the vehicle bays, the protected stores, the things that made this a nerve center, were still sealed below the earth. and a blast on the surface was rattling the roof, not breaking it. So they changed the aim. Instead of hammering the top, the next aircraft drove their bombs at the one place the underground world had to stay open to the world above: the ramp, the entrance, the throat of the whole complex. A bomb detonating at the mouth of that tunnel would not just scorch concrete, it would send its blast wave down the ramp into the buried bays, the way water forces its way down a drain. Underground had made the target hard to hit. It had also given every passage only one way in, and one way in is one way to reach everything inside. And because these were Horynych, reusable, not suicide drones, the aircraft that had already dropped and turned for home were not spent. They were coming back. A second pass, a third. The same squadron that opened the strike, returning to widen the wounds while the fires already lit, did the rest of the work below. Not every aircraft made it through. Over open steppe, a slow propeller plane is a target for anything still working. A surviving gun, a soldier with a rifle, a lucky burst. Some Horynych almost certainly went down, but that too was a loss already priced in. A squadron flew that night precisely so that losing a few would not stop the rest. The ones that got through were more than enough. The bombs did their work in sequence and physics took over from there. A 220-pound aerial bomb detonating at the mouth of an underground ramp does not simply make a hole. The blast wave has nowhere to spread but inward, down the tunnel, into the sealed bays, through the passages that connected the buried command post to its stores. Where that pressure met fuel, it lit it. Where it met stacked ammunition, it started something that no longer needed the drones at all. One store touching off the next, fire feeding fire in a space built to be closed, and now closed around its own burning. Above ground, the warehouses that had already been hit were fully alight. Below, the fire spread through the very structure Russia had dug to stay safe. The concrete that was meant to protect the hub now trapped the heat inside it. Hundreds of miles overhead, a NASA satellite passed over the isthmus and recorded what all of this became: a single massive thermal anomaly blooming over Stavky, a heat signature so large it registered from orbit, and one that did not fade. Hours later, the fire was still burning. Ukraine reported Russian losses at the site, including personnel unaccounted for. Those figures come from one side and have not been independently confirmed, and the full extent of what was destroyed underground may never be fully known. That is the nature of a target built to hide what it holds. But the thing that could be measured from space was not in doubt. Something that was supposed to be untouchable had caught fire and stayed on fire in the middle of Russia's most fortified rear. There is a difference between destroying a target and paralyzing one. Destroying it burns what sits on the ground. Paralyzing it means the enemy can no longer trust the one thing he built his whole plan around. That night at Stavky, Ukraine did the second. It didn't just burn a hub, it burned the idea that going underground could keep anything safe. Because this strike was never really about one logistics site. It was one more turn of a much larger screw. For months, Ukraine has been working to turn Crimea into an island, cutting the handful of threads that tie the peninsula to Russia's war. Crimea has only 3 overland corridors to the mainland, all funneling through choke points like Perekop and a single long bridge to Russia across the Kerch Strait. Ukraine has been methodically hitting every one of them. The bridges at Chongar and Perekop, convoys caught in the open. Traffic on the main supply highway toward the peninsula has reportedly fallen by roughly 70%. Each strike forces more weight onto fewer crossings, and the Kerch Bridge grows more critical and more exposed with every one. The hub at Stavky was a piece of that same machine. Take out the nodes that store and move supplies at the neck of Crimea, and you don't just destroy cargo. You force Russia to pull air defense, electronic warfare, and security back to guard its own rear. And every system dragged back to protect a buried warehouse is one no longer defending the front. That is the message the fire over the isthmus sent to Moscow, not that one site was lost. That there is no longer any such thing as the safe deep rear. Not the bridges, not the highways, not even a command post sealed under concrete and earth. So here's the question worth sitting with. If a squadron of converted sport planes can burn a buried hub at the gateway to Crimea, what does Russia do next? Thin out the front to defend the rear, or leave the rear exposed and hope? There may not be a good answer left. If you believe Ukraine deserves to live in peace and freedom, Hit like, subscribe, and share this video. Every bit of support helps more people understand what is really happening in this war. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.